Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. New York, one January evening. The wind seeped through the skyscrapers like a blade of glass, biting at skin, howling through the dark alleys of Manhattan. The city lights shimmered in an icy halo, reflected on the asphalt wet with slush. Passers-by hurried along, bundled up in their wool coats, each in pursuit of a destination, shelter, warmth. But not him. At the corner of 5th Avenue and 72nd Street, a black limousine slows down at a red light. The tinted windows mask the opulence of the interior, except for a fleeting glimmer, a slender wrist, a gold watch, a lost gaze. Inside, Ethan Monroe, 27, tech prodigy and CEO of Monroe Cyber Defense, stared blankly at the street. He was one of the youngest men on the Forbes list of self-made billionaires. Tailored suit, impeccable cut, face carved with precision. And yet, behind his calm features, something was wrong. Something fracture, of diffuse, like a cracked painting under a perfect lacquer. For years, vague and unfinished memories had come back to him in fragments, like pieces of a dream impossible to reconstruct. Of the white corridors, dehumanized. A lullaby whispered in a forgotten language. Of the children's cries at night. And always this first name which came back in his sleep, like a breath in the ear, Elijah. He rubbed his temples, closed his eyes, then opened them again, staring out at the street. And then, his heart skipped a beat. Under the awning of an abandoned building, curled up on a soggy piece of cardboard, a young homeless man was shivering. His coat was in tatters, his fingers blue. Melted snow clung to his hair. But that didn't stop Ethan. What the fuck, his face? He sat up in his seat, stunned. His breath caught in his throat. "It's me," he whispered in a low voice. The homeless man had the same angular jaw, the same steely look, a chin scar, identical to his own. A dirty, worn, abandoned reflection, but a reflection. "Stop the car. Now." His driver, James, looked at him briefly in the rearview mirror, surprised by the imperious tone. He braked gently. Ethan didn't even bother putting on his coat. He opened the door, let the icy wind whip his face, and rushed out. His leather shoes sank into a frozen puddle. He hurried across the street, his heart beating faster with every step. "Hey, how are you?" he said softly. The homeless man slowly raised his head. And then Ethan reeled inwardly. It was his double. A broken mirror, a twin fallen into a parallel world. The same drawn features. The same tired, but piercing gaze. Silence stretched between them, like a thread stretched across the abyss of the past. "What's your name?" Ethan asked, his throat tight. The young man stared at him for a long time, suspicious, as if he hesitated to answer. Then, in a hoarse voice, almost extinguished by the cold. "Elijah. Elijah Gray." "Why?" The name hit Ethan like an electric shock. It wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't not possible. Everything suddenly came together. The nightmares. The name. The face. It was him. It was him. Ethan took a step back, then took a deep breath, feeling his lungs freeze. "Come with me." Elijah looked at him as if he had proposed something crazy. "What?" "Just one night. You can stay somewhere warm. There's food, a bed. And I think we need to talk." Silence. Elijah seemed to weigh every word, every movement of his interlocutor. Was this a trap? A hidden camera? A mockery? He searched Ethan's eyes for something, and saw only of fear. And of truth. So, slowly, he nodded. Without a word, Ethan removed his own jacket and slung it over Elijah's shoulders. The gesture was simple, but laden with a weight neither of them could yet name. They climbed back into the limousine together, two almost identical silhouettes in the icy night. One had grown up in the golden light of the skyscrapers. The other, in shadow and dust. And neither of them knew yet how far this meeting would go. Change their lives forever. The Monroe mansion perched atop a hill, tucked away from the bustle of the city, like a castle frozen in time. Its gray stone facade, lit by the pale glow of a veiled moon, seemed to defy the winter cold. When the limousine pulled up in front of the imposing carved oak door, Elijah, still wrapped in Ethan's jacket, slowly got out, his gaze oscillating between curiosity and apprehension. As soon as he stepped inside, a solemn silence enveloped him. The waxed parquet floor reflected the rare rays of a lampshade. Majestic staircases rose to the upper floors, their polished wooden banisters adorned with delicate details. On the walls, large family portraits stared sternly at the intruder. The subtle scent of old wood and wax mingled with the sweeter scent of the fireplace hung in the air. Elijah wandered slowly, each footstep echoing in the vast space. His eyes scanned the expensive furniture, the thick rugs, the heavy velvet curtains that framed the windows. Everything here seemed to belong to another world, a world he had never had access to. Yet he couldn't help but feel a strange sensation, like a buried memory awakening at the touch of these places, a slight dizziness, a familiar chill, a feeling of being both foreign and at home. Ethan lit the fire in the living room's fireplace. The flames danced, casting shifting shadows across the faces of the two men sitting across from each other. The warmth was beginning to erase the icy cold they'd left outside. "Tell me," Ethan began, his voice still hesitant, "do you remember anything from your childhood? Something unusual, absurd, perhaps?" Elijah nodded, his eyes distant. "Yes, fragments. Memories that won't go away. White corridors, soft voices, a lullaby a nurse sang. And a cuddly toy, an old, worn-out rabbit that I've never been able to forget." Ethan frowned in surprise. "That's exactly what I have. A melody I can't place, a nurse who always whispered the same song. And this teddy bear." They exchanged a look, charged with silent emotion. "And this doctor, do you remember?" Ethan asked in a low voice. Yes, everyone called him Doc M. He always had that cold stare, but he was the one who decided everything. Doc M, Ethan repeated under his breath, as if trying to remember a name that was both precious and terrifying. With a slow gesture, Elijah removed a crumpled old photograph from his pocket. The paper was yellowed with age, the edges worn. They looked at it together, silent. In the photo, two little boys, almost identical, posed in a garden surrounded by rusty wire fencing. Their eyes shone with a lost innocence. Their resemblance was striking, almost disturbing. "Do you think we could have been brothers?" Ethan asked, as if afraid of the answer. Elijah felt his heart race. "I always knew I was missing someone. Someone important. Maybe." He paused, the words heavy with meaning. "Maybe it's you." In the following days, Ethan withdrew into himself. While Elijah explored the mansion, observing the paintings and books he had never been able to touch as a child, Ethan locked himself in his office, a cozy space lined with dark wood and screens connected to his private servers. But this was no longer to monitor his businesses or his portfolios. He was delving into another area, his past. He opened a wall safe hidden behind a painting. Inside were marked binders. Confidential, adoption papers, medical reports, falsified school records. Everything seemed perfectly in order, until he came across a forgotten name. Clinique Matheson. A yellowed letterhead, an administrative stamp, old bank transfers. Six-figure sums, paid regularly by Marshall E.T. Ruth Monroe, his adoptive parents, to this mysterious clinic which no longer exists today. A cold shiver ran up his spine. He couldn't do this alone. He made contact with Hank Porter, a former private investigator, now retired, known for having once uncovered several illegal adoption cases in the 90s. Hank, a man with steely eyes and a gravelly voice, agreed to dive back into the shadows. "If what you think is true, Ethan, then this is bigger than anything I've ever seen." For weeks, they cross-referenced information. Old databases, Department of Social Services records, medical journals, testimonies from former employees under pseudonyms. Until, slowly, a monstrous truth is taking shape. A private medical foundation, hidden behind a network of pediatric clinics, had been the center of a secret program in the 1990s, the Genesis Project. Officially, this was research on child intelligence and early development. But the reality was quite different. Partner orphanages, like the one where Ethan and Elijah grew up, served as breeding grounds. Children were assessed according to strict criteria: IQ, behavior, physical appearance, docility. The most promising were sold to wealthy families under the guise of humanitarian adoption. The others, deemed unusable, remained to rot in the system. A cold sorting. Dehumanized. Legally hidden. And at the center of it all, Dr. Marvin Matheson, alias Doc M. Ethan was a chosen one. A superior product. Elijah, considered more rebellious, less malleable, had been pushed aside, left behind. The two brothers were separated at the age of 6. Their memories were altered by covert conditioning sessions. And as if to erase all traces, the orphanage in question had mysteriously burned 2 years later. A fire officially accidental, but whose reports, found by Hank, were riddled with inconsistencies. Ethan's anger rose like a black tide. He constantly replayed mental images of his comfortable life, the praise he received, the newspaper articles that described him as a self-taught genius. All this was just the fruit of a twisted system, of a crime disguised as destiny. And meanwhile, Elijah slept on the streets, bearing the invisible scars of a stolen past. One night, unable to sleep, Ethan went downstairs to the living room. Elijah was there, sitting by the fireplace, in an oversized bathrobe. He held an old photograph he'd found in the attic, the twins, before they'd been separated. Ethan sat down across from him, his eyes heavy. "My whole life is a lie," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I was built on the back of your misfortune." A long silence fell. Elijah looked at him, his eyes not angry, but filled with a peaceful pain. "It's not your fault, Ethan. This system, it took both of us. It trapped you in a world that wasn't yours. It left me forgotten. But now we have a chance. A chance to get to the truth." He placed his hand on his brother's shoulder, as if to seal a silent pact. A pact no longer of silence, but of justice. The truth, no matter how long it's buried, always comes to the surface. And when it does, it explodes. Armed with painstakingly gathered evidence, bank records, testimonies from former employees, coded medical reports, and an audio recording found in an old warehouse, Ethan and Elijah turned to a powerful voice, Rebecca Lewis, one of the country's most feared investigative journalists. Rebecca, in her 40s, with her auburn hair pulled back and a sharp gaze, had brought down politicians, exposed pharmaceutical scandals, and denounced corruption in social services. She knew the inner workings of the system, its lies, its codes, its silences. When Ethan handed her the complete file, she remained silent for a long moment. She reread, cross-checked, double-checked, then looked up. "What you have here is a bomb. But a real bomb. And I'm going to detonate it." 2 weeks later, the scandal broke. CNN's 8 p.m. news opened with these words. Project Genesis, how orphan children were sold to billionaire families under medical coverage. The revelations followed one after another in a documentary series broadcast by a global platform. The names of influential families who had bought their children. Doctors still working in private clinics. Politicians who covered up or funded the program under the pretext of ethical research. And above all, thief-assessed victims, separated children, broken lives, missing twins. Ethan and Elijah agreed to testify openly. Their story became the living symbol of institutional lies, but also of redemption. The audience was shocked. Social media exploded. Protests broke out in front of the medical foundation's headquarters. Dozens of former orphanage residents began to testify. A special commission of inquiry was formed in the Senate. The arrest warrants were launched against the last survivors of Project Genesis. Some doctors were taken from their luxurious offices and handcuffed in front of the cameras. CEOs of clinics, donors to private foundations, and judges linked to rigged adoptions were summoned. The system was cracking. But for Ethan, that wasn't enough. He had to rebuild. He had to repair. And he had to give a voice to those who had been silenced. With part of his personal fortune, which he now considered tainted, Ethan created a foundation. Reflections, so that innocence will never again be separated. Based in the completely transformed Monroe Mansion, Reflays became a resource, support, and justice center for the system's former forgotten children. It included psychologists specializing in trauma early, a legal service to find adoption files falsified, DNA cells to reunite lost siblings, and above all, a dignified, warm reception area for those who had never had a home. Ethan took over as administrative director, but refused to make any public statement. Elijah, himself, became the face of the foundation. Dressed simply, often without a tie, Elijah stood before cameras, schools, institutions, and television studios. He spoke with the raw sincerity of those who have lost everything, and found what matters most. I was left on the streets. My brother grew up in luxury. But this system stole something from both of us. Today, we're not looking for revenge. We're looking for justice. And healing. His speech to the UN 2 years later went viral worldwide. Every time a child is reduced to a number, a potential, a product, it is humanity that is ripped away. Thanks to Reflays, more than 600 families separated were brought together in the first 5 years. Laws were passed to make the adoption process more transparent. And the name, Project Genesis, entered the history books as one of the biggest social scandals of the 21st century. But at the heart of it all, there remained two men, two brothers separated by life, united forever by a truth they had dared to face. The seasons had passed. The Monroe Mansion, once frozen in silence and the coldness of solitude, was now a vibrant place. Every room, every hallway, every corner had been transformed to welcome life. The large living room echoed with children's voices, peals of laughter, and improvised music. Walls once adorned with austere canvases now bore framed drawings, reunion photos, and words of encouragement. The marble was no longer crushing, it served as a floor for free steps, timid dances, and childish races. The Monroe Mansion had become a refuge. A temporary home for young people born of chaos, silence, and abandonment. A place of transition to relearn how to trust, to dream, to rebuild. Ethan still lived there, but he was no longer alone in its large, empty rooms. He lived surrounded by those he had decided to protect. Those he now called his peers, his brothers, his sisters in history. And Elijah, for his part, had naturally established himself as a key figure. A brother at heart, a discreet guide, a living memory of the path he had traveled. Without prepared speeches, without posturing. Just with his presence. That evening, the sun was slowly setting over the estate's gardens, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. The light wind rustled the leaves, and the scent of pine trees mixed with the fresh earth created a soothing atmosphere. Elijah and Ethan sat down on an old stone bench facing the ground's wide paths. The bench had been repaired by the foundation's youth and engraved with a single word, roots. The silence between them was no longer heavy. It was accomplice. Alive. Elijah, hands clasped in his lap, slowly turned his head toward his brother. "Do you regret taking me that night?" he asked, his voice soft, almost fragile. Ethan looked at him for a long time, a silent smile playing on his lips. He searched for his words, weighed them, then answered, bluntly. "No. I just wish I had found you sooner." A beat. Then a breath. Elijah nodded slowly. "I didn't know I was missing someone, until I met you." They stood there, motionless, their gaze fixed on the horizon. The wind made the branches of the tall trees dance in the distance. A group of children laughed near the fountain. A young girl sang, alone, sitting on the steps. Ethan, his voice full of gratitude and suppressed emotion, whispered. I didn't find a single homeless person that night. I found half of my soul. This mansion was cold. Empty. It was the gilded cage of my ignorance. Today, it is full of light, truth, and scars that have become strength. I did not build this foundation to make people forget the past, but to honor it. For all the Elijahs I've passed by without seeing them. For those who were abandoned, forgotten, sordid, sold. What I thought was my success was an illusion. Today, I want to succeed differently. Because that evening, in an alley, I didn't find a single homeless person. I found half of my soul again. Ethan Monroe. I slept on the streets for years. I learned to be wary, to hide, to survive. But it was in this mansion that I found a bed, and above all a place. This mansion is no longer a house for the rich. It's a house for repairs. My brother didn't erase my past. He acknowledged it. And in that look, I found a home.